This meeting is being recorded.
And then I'm going to hand things over to Sam and Nathan.
Yeah, cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Nathan. This is Sam. Thank you for joining us for the second of three webinars that we've been doing on photography and why it's important for creative entrepreneurs. Tonight's webinar is the key to unlocking opportunity, why quality photography is important for creatives and how to use it. So let's get started here. Sorry. Oh, yeah. No, the plug. I'm so sorry. This is, and I touched something. I'm sorry.
I was like, you're in charge tonight, and that's bad.
Don't put me in charge of things.
Yeah, it's a bad idea to put him in charge of things other than like the camera.
So
go for it.
I was going to say thank you to Katie and the CBA for sponsoring and hosting this for us tonight. We've been very excitedly, yes, we've been very excitedly working with her and the organization for a while now. And this was a really interesting project for us to collaborate on. So we want to thank them for providing this space and opportunity for us to do this. I also want to thank our panelists tonight that are here: Sarah Cohen, Candice Jane Opper, and Paige Elkanapor. I always second guess myself, but I've known her for so long. I'm sorry, Paige.
That's right. And the Glass Center has also been a great partner of ours for a long time and are support, like teaming up with us on these workshops as well.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm distracted with that.
And yeah, I know. But also, just so everybody knows, on the recording and folks who are new, we have dogs. If we mute ourselves, you won't hear anything that we have to say. So you will hear dog jingly noises, and we will try to keep them quiet with treats and stuff. And they might make an appearance because they like to do that too. I'm experimenting. I put this at the end of the presentation last time. I just want to say, like, for folks that if you like the content of this webinar, if you're interested in getting the recording of the previous one, if you weren't here, you can always email me. But these are the things that are coming up next. We'll have an info session that really digs into the, nitty gritty of how the photo sessions work and how they're different from booking your own photo session. And we're going to introduce a toolkit that we created with the CBA last year. And then we will have 2 photo days, straightforward and styled. And we'll talk about, we'll really go over the difference between those in the info session as well. So on to like a bona fide introduction, although we've kind of already done it.
Yeah, so again, I'm Nathan, this is Sam. We are artists that support local artists and creative small businesses. We specialize in marketing artwork, so you don't have to. Basically, what that means is that we take on those roles and responsibilities, those little things that everyone has to kind of do in the online world these days to present themselves to the world as a legit business or as an entrepreneur. And it gets you back in the studio or back to what you want to be doing. If it's not Porter has to say hi. So yeah, we basically want to get creatives back to doing what they do best.
Yeah, you can just click it and move forward.
So our agenda tonight is introduction. We've gone over the introduction already. I'll introduce ourselves. Now we are going over the agenda so that everyone's on the same page here. You can kind of see what's going on. Then we're going to talk about the elements of a strong image with some examples. We'll also include some not great examples so you can kind of see what we mean on the flip side. And then we're going to introduce our panelists tonight. We've got Sarah Cohen, Candice Opper, and Paige Elkanapor. We'll have a nice friendly discussion here. If anyone wants to, if they already have questions, you can put it in the chat right now. Otherwise, we can answer questions that come up, to the folks that are here. We'll have a little Q&A. So let's get into it. Yeah. So principles of strong images. basically, the most important thing you want to keep in mind for producing strong images for yourself is good lighting practices. Here we have an example where you can see that the arrangement has been taken just with window light to the right, and then it has a white bounce card that's been introduced on the left side to fill in that shadow area. But, perhaps somebody actually likes that little more moody kind of lighting. So in the third example, there's taking with a black flag instead of the reflector to kind of deepen that shadow. The point here is just kind of, be mindful of little things you can do to tweak your images. Like this is a great example of a very small change that you can do in a DIY setup that can drastically change the look and the feel. Yeah, the outcome of your image. Another great principle of strong imagery is contrast. If you have a dark object on a light background or vice versa, it really stands out. It really, presents, it sticks in the mind of your viewer. If on the other hand, you've got, gray washed out images like the one on the right, it muddies detail. You can't really see what's going on. You can't really tell a lot of the texture that's involved. It's just blah. And unfortunately, most cell phone cameras, they tend to see those bright areas or those dark areas, and they want to push the image quality or the image tone to that low contrast image. So you want to be aware of that and know some techniques on how to change that. So another principle of strong imagery is having a good clean background. Here are 3 examples that you can see. You have an object that's taken on a not very clean background. It's just an Afghan on a couch somewhere, and you can see that the detail.
A couch somewhere.
So you can see that the detail of the background takes away from the object itself. It's, you can see what the object is, but the edges of it are a little indistinct, and, the background competes for attention. People look at the background, they see things. What is that? They want to know more about the background, and you don't want them to be looking at the background. So for the second image, got rid of the Afghan, just put it on a nice even toned background. But it's not a very good, there's a crease in the back, and it's not a very clean surface. It didn't take a lot of care so it's somewhat better as a background, but it still is not great. So in the third shot, then it's on white paper. Oh, I just saw that the crop is kind of messed up there.
It's
but-
okay.
So the third example is on a nice clean white background, which works really well for your online digital presence, because we're used to viewing web pages on white backgrounds.
And I'm just noticing that the lighting seems to be very different in each of these. Like, did you take?
Yeah,
them in-
this is sort of multiple. This is an example of multiple not great things.
Okay.
The example on the right also is relatively low contrast.
Yeah.
I did this with an iPhone to kind of illustrate that, like, the iPhone sees that white background. That's actual white paper,
Right.
but the iPhone makes it look like something else. So I could have taken the time to edit that in the camera. I could have lit the scene better with additional lighting, or use the settings in the camera app to adjust for that too.
Yeah. It's just interesting because it's a blue-gray object, and that, like, the one in the middle is very, like, white.
Yeah.
So anyway,
This is an example
continuing.
of not a great thing. So yeah, a lot of artists, when they're making their work, they often have some kind of texture or detail, something that isn't immediately noticeable on the wider shots that you take. And I definitely encourage artists to get details of their work so that you can include those in, in your listings, or, in your product pages, so that people, they get a sense of the whole image on a nice clean background, but then you zoom in, you can kind of see those details to see all those little things that you worked so hard on. Yeah, so then this is a big one. This is a lot. I spend a lot of time making sure things are in focus, because something that's not in focus, you can't really tell what's going on. You can't see any of the detail. This was
Hey.
Hey, stop. Sorry, excuse us. Yeah, so we've got a poorly angled image, but out of focus. And just keep in mind that you want to keep things in focus and make sure that you've got everything, nice, sharp detail.
And focus is one of the few things that you can't really do anything about. You can't
Yeah,
bring
yeah,
something
that's-
into focus in editing. Like you can judge,
You can
lighting
adjust,
stuff
yeah.
and maybe make some of the other things a little bit better in post, but if it's out of focus, it's out of focus.
Yeah. Yeah. That's my
So we're moving on to the panel talk because we wanted that to just be sort of like quick review of some image stuff. And then we really want to talk to these folks and just really get some other perspectives besides just us talking about how important photography is, because I know we sound like a, broken, whatever
Record.
thank you,
Broken
whatever
record.
the saying, a broken record. So I'm gonna quickly introduce our fabulous panel. Sarah Cohen uses many materials, but her favorite is glass. Transplanted to Pittsburgh for a job at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, Sarah started her own studio practice with jewelry and mosaics, both Petal Vision Glass and S. Cohen Studio. Looking at natural materials with a critical eye, sustainability is the catalyst that drives most of her work. She unabashedly believes that the power of art and imagery can bring about profound social change. Yay, I agree. Candace Jane Opper is a writer, an editor, and a numbers person. She is the author of Certain and Impossible Events, featured in NPR's 2021 Books We Love. She moonlights as Fringe Benefits Bookkeeping, where she keeps the books for a variety of small businesses, nonprofits, and individuals in the Pittsburgh area. As the marketing director at Pittsburgh Glass Center, Paige Ilkanapur has overseen the marketing, PR, and advertising efforts of the organization since 2004. Paige came to PGC with 25 years in marketing and PR, where she helped guide a variety of clients from Microsoft to Development Dimensions International, and volunteered for many nonprofit organizations such as Gateway to the Arts, Friends of the Riverfront, Pittsburgh New Works Festival, and Three Rivers Rowing Association, among others. So, yay. We came up with this question as sort of like a kickoff, but really if you are prepared to say something that doesn't fit with answering this question, just go for it. And and I didn't actually pick an order for you guys to start. So feel free to unmute yourselves and say your piece.
I'd be happy to start.
Sure.
Because photography at the Glass Center, we've been working with Sam and Nate for, I can't remember how long, almost since the beginning when I started at the Glass Center. But photography for me as the marketing director has been my most important tool to help the Glass Center get noticed and get publicity. I've made it a priority for me to always have photographs taken all the time. Whenever something's happening, we'll have photos taken. At the Glass Center, we also have a line of tableware, glassware that we also will, I try to put it on my schedule twice a year to get good photos of the glassware taken too. So that I'll always have something at my fingertips. That's one of the things I recommend to you is always have good photography at your fingertips, because you never know when someone from Table Magazine or maybe Jen from Next Pittsburgh calls and says, oh, we're doing this roundup of makers or jewelry or whatever. Do you have a photo you can send over to me, and send it right now? And I'm like, oh, yes. Thank you. Go to Nate. We have this treasure trove of photos on Flickr, and I can grab something and put it together. And that's what makes, then we get publicity out of it, and it helps raise the awareness for the Glass Center, just always being ready to respond on a moment's notice.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We have less of this now, but in the beginning of our business, we would get artists contacting us and saying hey, can you take photos today? Because I need the images yesterday.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. And especially you don't know that you know, us or another photographer that you want to work with can, you know, turn on a dime like that. So always like planning for photos before the opportunity arises is really the key to opportunity.
Right.
Planning ahead, and you can reuse these photos in so many ways on
Yeah.
the website, on social media in many ways, and reuse them after a while. People forget and they don't see them. And, you know, for different opportunities, for exhibitions or craft fairs or media, you know, we reuse things all the time, and it's just great to have them already, to plan ahead and have really great photos ready to go, because I know you can't turn them around. You have to make time to come and take the photo and then process them and then get them to you. And by that time, the reporters have moved on. Like,
Yes.
they're like, we've got other photos. We're moving on.
Yeah.
And I think that even with the sort of ongoing storyline that like print is dead, and you know, but like Table Magazine has an online thing, and all these publications that we're talking about have online portals, if not print. And
They have their
through
social
that,
media channels. As
yeah,
well.
and they do, like, they reach so many people. Like you think to yourself, like, well, I don't read Table Magazine, why would some? But like, so many people read these things, and it's really an incredible opportunity to take advantage of. I mean, the photo credit that Nathan has gotten on those things has been like people that he hasn't heard from in his, like an aunt that he hasn't seen in, you know, a few years will like hit him up on Facebook and be like, I saw you in the Post Gazette, right? Like, I saw your name and whatever. So it's like, there's definitely, you know, major exposure coming from those opportunities, if you can take advantage of them.
If I can add to that as well. Like, that was just really good. One time, a picture of mine that I entered into like a craft fair was used for their promotional work. And so it's just like an added bonus that I didn't even pay for. Everyone wins with good photography because the fair looked good. I looked good. People, when I promoted that image, then thought even more highly of me. And I also want to say hi to Dan Droz. I think he's on here, and he's really great, especially with images and like helping me with graphics. So I just want to say hello.
Sarah's one of those artists that I love at the Glass Center, because whenever we have an exhibition or something's coming up, she's one of the first to respond with good images and some information. And that, you know, that's when at the Glass Center, if we're having an exhibition or maybe even like at the Handmade Arcade, they're looking for assets. We're looking for assets to help us promote and build the look of our exhibitions and our show. And by making it easy for them, responding on time or early with really good quality images, it just makes it more likely that you're going to be the one featured. And it makes my job really easy. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much. That's so nice. I'll keep it up.
What about you, Candace?
All right, I'm up. Sorry, my Wi-Fi is really crappy, so hopefully I don't cut out. But yeah, so I mean, as a writer, like that part of my life doesn't require a whole lot of imagery, though Sam and Nate did take my headshot for my book, which is like a very moody headshot that went along with the book very nicely, and that's been really great. I've gotten a lot of great feedback on that.
Okay.
But I've worked with art.
Oh no.
And I do mostly financial work now, but previously I've done a lot of marketing work. Oh, sorry. All right, I'm gonna shut my video off and you can just listen to me. Maybe that will be better. Okay. So I've worked with a lot of arts organizations and done lots of different roles, including marketing. And I often have acted as kind of the gatekeeper for a lot of artists who are trying to get involved with the organization or trying to get their work placed somewhere. Like, for example, I work with Casey Droege Cultural Productions, and we, Casey does consulting and places artwork and curates artwork for a lot of places. So we see a lot of artwork coming in. I've also worked with Small Mall for a long time that sells local artwork on consignment. So it really makes a difference when an artist has great photography, because not only is it easier to like assess their work and see if it's going to be a good fit for what you're trying to place, but it also shows that they take their work really seriously and they're not just, you know, taking sort of half-assed photos with their phone and passing it along. And I think, I mean, it's just the first thing that you see, you know, like when you're assessing someone for artwork, you're going to look at their work first. Like, of course, you're going to read their cover letter and their resume and other things like that, but the work is the most important thing. And so you want that presentation to look professional. I also work with an organization that sometimes writes grants for artists. And so, you know, those artists that we work with always have a slew of like professional photography, images of their pieces, as well as images of their pieces in context, whether that's like in an exhibition or in the space that they're in. Like that helps too, to show, you know, that your work has been exhibited places and like showing people interacting with your work and showing how your work looks in a specific space. That's huge for grant applications and things like that. So, I mean, it's really pivotal.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting that you use the word that like gatekeeper, because I think of like there's someone in that position who's making the decision on whether your application for XYZ like moves on to the next step. And there is like so much more communicated in the quality of the images than just like what the thing is, you know, it is like that you've invested the time or possibly the money if you outsourced it, and that you're really taking the image of your work seriously and that you're taking your career seriously. So yes, you should get this award for however, like a grant for $10,000 to do more stuff, or have the opportunity to have your work placed in like a fancy downtown high rise or
Yeah. And you're absolutely right too about it being like a first impression that you form. And, you know, a bad photo of a great work of art, you know, you can eventually try to explain how that's a great work of art. But if you have a great photo of it, you don't need to explain it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So I think we just, yeah, like we can, I can stop sharing the screen and we can kind of go into discussion mode if folks have questions, and we can, especially since we have a small group, we can just talk about what, if there's more input to be had. I was reminded of, in terms of that getting the photos ready before you need them thing. We heard a quote from a glass artist that I met like probably 12 years ago at the Glass Center, named Joe Cariotti, who said the work isn't finished until it's photographed. And
I remember when he said that,
I was just like,
I was like, that is such, and you know, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was going to say, like, earlier today, I was consulting with a potential client, and they asked me basically like, how do you plan your photography? And we talked about a number of different approaches to that. And at a certain point, they stopped and they said, well, it sounds like maybe what you're talking about here is me, you know, working into my normal artist workflow photography of some kind, so that it's just easier for me to like make a thing and then I photograph it, then I make a thing and then, you know, or I make a bunch and then I photograph them and kind of work it into what I'm already doing. And I said, yes, exactly. Like, if you're hiring somebody,
you get it.
if you're doing it yourself, whatever, if it becomes a part of your workflow, then you have those, you know, possibly processed photos, but you have those photos like immediately ready, so that if somebody sees it on Instagram and buys it, you still have a photo and you can promote that piece that you made, but you've already made the sale. And
right. And I think it's relevant to mention that Joe Cariotti has a very successful glass studio in Los Angeles. And as someone who has for a long time had this philosophy of his work isn't done until it's photographed, he's had his work featured in like every magazine ever. Like, we're not talking about Table magazine, we're talking about like Vanity Fair probably, and like international magazines. He's had his work purchased and in the background of episodes of Sex and the City and other, you know, swanky apartment shows, because his work is like very suited to the swanky apartments, but I think it like those are again, it's not like they just took his work and put it in the show and that like they bought it. So he benefited from it. It's not like that. We can put you on Sex and the City, therefore you'll get this exposure. No, we're not, we're not advocating for that. But yeah, does anybody else questions, thoughts? What's up, Dan?
Hi, Sarah. I want to sort of build on this question about in situ, like in a setting versus a studio. I'm a sculptor and often do really large pieces. So
Yeah.
scale is an issue. So, if I'm photographing a maquette, it looks like the same as, a large sculpture. And what I've done many times is to Photoshop, the maquette in a setting. But I just want to get your views about setting up shots in a context, in a home or an office, or showing the floor at least, so that scale is a more important part of the experience of seeing a photo.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great thing to explore. It's it's definitely challenging because you want to bring elements into the frame that show the scale of the object either directly or indirectly, but that don't dominate or become distracting elements from the frame. So I definitely think that there's it's a balancing act, I think, with, like you said, even just showing the floor. If you have, if it's in a room that has, baseboards, are a good, cue as to the size of something. I know some artists have taken some photos of their object, like in their hands, or they're holding it in some way, as an additional, like they have the main photo that doesn't show scale, but then they'll also have a photo of like a mug that they're holding showing scale. For your items, I'm sure it's not something you can hold because if I remember correctly, even your smaller items were still, sizable and hefty.
Yeah, and in the past when we've worked together, I've only brought the small pieces, but they represent a relatively small percentage.
Right, because you're working at much larger scales.
Yeah.
I think that's. I would say that my advice there is to, experiment with what you include in the frame that shows off the scale, like trees or brickwork. The objects that you can tell how big they are, but be careful with how much you use that, just because it can get distracting if it's,
Yeah, I mean, I think the best solution, like the best thing, is to be able to photograph something in an actual place.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
photographing paintings on the wall where they are and sculptures where they are. But obviously when you're proposing to make something new, or you like, maybe you don't like the photos that some so-and-so took, and you installed this thing down in Dallas, and you're like, well, I can't go take a new photo because I don't have time, all that stuff. Like the Photoshop is a great tool. Obviously, we're big fans. It all comes down to like a healthy balance on how you use it, because there are some people who have done that, like sort of putting their piece into a situation and it looks super tacky and terrible and everyone can see it from 10 miles away. But if you know what you're doing and you can make the shadows work and kind of zhuzh it a little bit so that it doesn't look like sort of slapped together, it's a great opportunity to be able to show something that you can't get a photo of. But like we, for example, have a client who, through the Glass Center, who made she was commissioned to make a lighting piece, and she installed it. And then she immediately said to the homeowner, is it okay with you if we set up a time for my photographer to come by to take a photograph of this installed in this room? And they were like, yeah, of course. And that worked out well. And, Nate went over and took those photos. It's harder when you wait 2 or 3 years and then you're like, hey, Mrs. like
Yeah.
so-and-so who bought this sculpture, can I come over? And the other thing about like what Nate was saying about thinking about like what else is in the frame, and that this is why we always we never tell people that we can do like in situ photos by like putting it up on the wall in our house, because it's not going to help your artwork, because our house is a disaster like pre-renovation zone. And so it becomes a whole other layer of thinking and planning and coordinating when you want to like know what the aesthetic is of this place. If you're setting up a photo shoot to take photos in a space,
Right.
Does that space really work for what you want to communicate?
Right.
And so that's has been the challenge when, we had someone approach us about wanting like a clean white kitchen. And I was like, who has that? And so it brings in that challenge. But I think, when the real thing isn't possible, photoshopping is totally workable. And obviously, I mean, we know you have experience with it. It's just when people who don't know what they're doing with graphics programs are like, I'm going to cut this out and paste it on here. And that's what it's no good.
Another question, but I don't want to dominate. So if other people have questions, maybe this would be a good time, because I just have a couple of other things.
What was, Katie, what's this thing?
So the reason I put that into the chat is because thinking about large scale work and how to photograph it, I'm a really big fan of Raven Half Moon's work in general. But one of the
these are great examples.
Yeah, and one of the things that is I think really interesting about the way that she photographs her work, especially if you follow her on social media, she takes a lot of pictures of herself in relationship to her work, so that it's done in a way where she's not saying like this is for scale, like it, but it's clear but it is, but it's really like really smart. And she also kind of talks about how she's like a very tall person, and the way that the photographs are taken, you kind of can tell that she's tall, and you can see that for some of her work, she's barely taller than her sculptures, and then in other work she's smaller. And I just think it's a really clever, I don't even think she would probably use this word, but it's branding, and identity is a part of her work. And so her seeing herself and her identity in relationship to the sculptures. So it's working on all of these really great levels, right? The works are framed well. You get a sense of the space, you get a sense of their scale, but also a lot of where the work is shown is not like super refined or whatever, but it's like enough to where it just feels clean and doable. Yeah. And it's good. It's not pristine, but the work was never meant to be seen in a pristine place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but it's not overthought. Like there's just a lot going on there that I think is really successful. So that's why I shared that as an example.
Yeah. Those are great examples. And
it reminds me of a glass artist, Janice Miltenberger, so I just put her link in the chat also, that she always, when she goes to her photographer with new work, and she makes oftentimes glass figures that are like above life size. Yeah. Well, because she's short, but it might be like life size for I don't know, a basketball player or something, but she takes a photo of herself next to the piece. And again, it's not done in a way that's like, look at the scale, look how big it is. It's just a nice photo of her standing next to her piece, but it communicates so much. Yeah. Which I think is great.
Yeah.
One other question has to do with shadows. So I do a lot of suspended work. So it's not sitting on a surface.
Right.
And it is often in its like in its in situ placement, not against a wall. In other words, it's hanging in space.
Yeah.
And capturing that notion of, mobility and the shadows and so forth sometimes are challenging because there's no surface where the shadows can easily bounce off of.
Right.
And I'm just curious, do you sort of simulate a background, and that is to say, put something behind the sculpture so that you can effectively, generate a shadow? Or is there something in terms of contrast or many views to capture it in situ, maybe photographing it from the top, so that you have the sense of its dimension and
Right. Yeah.
its
Yeah.
evanescent quality in the air?
Right. Yeah. I think I understand where you're coming from with this question, and I think there's a few things ways you can approach this. Sorry, treats for the dog. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. If there's no surface close enough to the object to have a shadow cast on it, then sometimes, yeah, you do want to, pull a background in closer to the object so that you can see the shadows in the frame. The angle of the lighting also helps that too, so that if you have the lighting coming from the side, the shadow is going to be opposite the piece, and that might be completely out of frame. So you kind of just want to adjust the lighting angles there to get that shadow in the frame in the way that you want to see it. As far as like simulating it, again, like I don't generally try to fake a lot of things in Photoshop, but I have had reason to produce, shadows from.
He's being a turd.
Yeah. And doing that is a matter again of doing a balancing act of using Photoshop in a careful way so that you're making, if you're producing a shadow that is relatively realistic, but it's unobtrusive. I see online listings that will have fake shadows, and it's basically just like a little gray oval. And that kind of works for a lot of things. It's not accurate because your work especially will not, I'm sure it won't be just a simple oval.
But I think there's a difference between what you're putting on a Shopify site to sell creative product and in that e-commerce situation versus when you are applying to a referral, like a request for proposals or a call for artists for something of a larger scale, more sculptural. Those thankfully usually have the option in the request to include additional images. So I think that the situation that you're describing gives it's a great opportunity to have multiple images tell the story of what the experiences of this thing. Yeah. Even video has been, especially if it is literally moving, if there's if video is allowed to be submitted, that is something that can help tell that story. But are they lit or are they just hanging sculpture?
Just hanging. They're just maybe 3 foot, 4 foot diameter kind of thing.
Yeah.
I have one last question, and then I'll shut up. Which is JPEG versus TIFF, or HEIC, or
yeah. So
there's different formats, because I have a book coming out and I gave them all the JPEGs, and they said no, I have to convert them to TIFFs. And right. So then I wasn't even sure that converting from a JPEG to a TIFF was, because the resolution, how that
works.
Yeah.
So
curious.
So in my workflow, when I'm outputting all of those photos at the end, they are in JPEG format, which is a lossy compressed format. I'm using the highest JPEG settings, so they're barely compressed. And having tested those files through trying to re-edit the JPEG files like you're not supposed to do, but trying to do that to sort of pull out all of the
When you convert a JPEG to a TIFF, does it increase the resolution?
It does not increase the resolution. It increases the file size, But a lot of older printers still require that TIFF format for the software that they're using to make separations for the print pre-press or whatever
Right.
it is.
But the conversion shouldn't do anything negative unless you're converting like a JPEG that is like low res to start with. You can't like make it better by making it a TIFF. But if you're starting with high res JPEGs and they want you to convert to TIFF, that won't be a problem. We just we don't deliver TIFFs, and because like the mass majority of our clients are like sending things through email. They're, to press opportunities, they're uploading things online, and like none of the internet is not a TIFF happy place.
Right.
And also, storage is probably, it's cheaper than it's ever been before, but still like, a TIFF is going to take up way more space on your hard drive or whatever storage device.
Yeah, it's about
but
3 to 4 times.
Printing a book is one of those times where it makes sense. And I know you mentioned HEIC, and like we don't use that at all. I've had people send us images in that, and I can't use them until I convert them to JPEG.
Yeah, it's a Apple proprietary format. So if you're in the Apple system, if you're in the Apple ecosystem, it's just a different file format that they're trying to promote, as they want it to be the next JPEG replacement, and it's not gonna happen. My recommendation is that HEIC you can use for stuff within that ecosystem, but for anything that's going to end up on the web, you're going to want a JPEG version of it eventually. Yeah.
Hey, Cynthia.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
It's good to see my Glass Center friends. And I had the honor of having Nathan work with me in the past on a couple pieces I had submitted for a juried exhibition. So I really appreciated your professional, skills and everything, helping me do that. I'm working with ceramics, and I have the glass, the glaze finish. So for my needs, I don't always need the professional pictures done, but for a DIY photography, photographs at home, do you have some recommendations to get rid of the lights, the glare of the lights in the room and the glare of the lights, using, I don't have any filtered flashes or anything like that. And maybe there's some inexpensive equipment you can recommend. I have not researched this yet, but if you have any recommendations for photographing at home at a less, like a little lesser scale for me or others.
So just really quickly, after last week's webinar, we sent out the recording from that, and also like a PDF ebook that we created, and I can absolutely send that to you. And it's essentially it's good, better, best, like tips for doing exactly what you're talking about, doing it yourself. So I'll send that to you. The key thing that about reflections is that the angle of the light relative to the subject, depending on where your camera is that right?
Yeah.
So if you don't, like having light modifiers that spread the light out is nice, but you can still get reflections with those. So the key piece is understanding that like you don't want the light to be like pointing in the same direction that your camera is pointing.
You want it off to the sides, but off, so if I remember correctly, so you've got ceramics and some of them are round pieces, or at least they have sort of an arcing, shape to that. What the specific challenge that introduces is that basically, a round object, and if it has a glossy surface, there's going to be a point on it that reflects where that light is, almost no matter where you put the light. So yeah, a modifier will help what that highlight looks like. And there's various things you can do to better diffuse that so that highlight looks better, or at least tells you something about the object. Like if you eliminate all of those reflections, then no one can tell that it's a reflective piece. Then it has a matte look to it. So it's a matter of,
She's an art teacher. She knows.
yeah. Yeah, so it's a matter of finding the angles that work with how you have your object framed in your camera. You've got the look, the composition you want, and then you're moving the lights around to get a better position of where those highlights are on the piece, or if they're not on the piece. And then you can then modify those lights to change the way that highlight looks. The easiest way to get rid of it is to just make sure that it's not anywhere that's in a reflective angle that's visible to the camera.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I missed your first session, but I'm glad to be here.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
good to see you.
Yeah,
It
thanks.
looks like Sarah put a recommendation in the chat. Is that something you've used?
Yeah, I didn't get it off of Amazon, but that's the only, not that I have anything, I don't want to go there, but they have it there. I know they have it in other places. It's just like easy because it folds up, and it's not like, an editorial shoot with a background or a person wearing it that could show where it would go on the body, but just to get a clear cut image on a white background of something really glassy is like almost impossible. You can see it now, like all these reflections. Oh, that one. Anyway, so that actually works.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
And I do
Sarah's jewelry literally is like rounded, shiny glass with metallic foil inside. So it's just like reflection central.
I'm a nightmare when I'm people for product photography.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah. Were there any other questions, comments, thoughts? Porter has lots to say. It's not helpful.
But it was already addressed. It was about context. Like I do a range of work, and I respond to a lot of different artist calls. And some of my work is large scale pieces that's on buildings, and the context is there already. But then I have pieces that are smaller like this, that's in the same medium, where I would have to, photograph it on the wall. And, there's things like you could take it on have it with a plant or something like that. But then it gets repetitive if you have to keep using that same format. But, just listening to the conversation, I heard some good ideas. So
good. Yay. Devron, do you have like good photos of the large installations that you've done?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but they could get better and better.
Oh, I'm sure. We went to the unveiling of the Natik and Allison mural in East Liberty last week.
Yeah.
And as we were walking back to our car, I was like, oh, look, that's a plaque with Devron on it. And then I looked and I was like, oh, he made that.
Oh yeah.
And because I knew you told me you'd done something that was in East Liberty, but I hadn't like placed it. So we walked past it and I was like, oh.
Yeah, that thing is huge, like 3,000 pounds.
Woo, that's a lot of clay.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have anything else. The next session we're doing on May 4th is it's an info session. So we're gonna kind of go through the toolkit resources and introduce the sort of who, what, when, where, how, and all that stuff. And then it's gonna really be opened up to questions similar to how it was tonight. So if folks have more questions, particularly about how those sessions work would be great, but if they're just questions about photography and stuff, we can roll with it. Yeah. Or questions about our dogs,
I have one thing to add, and I'm gonna turn my video off so you can actually hear me. But it's like, I just want to like bring up the reality that other people are going to take photos of your work if it's publicly displayed, and that's something to keep in mind. And like, because of social media and the algorithms, like those things are just going to be floating out there. And my case in point is that my book was featured a couple times in the city paper, which is great. And I'm so grateful for the promotion and everything. But someone took a photo of it just like sort of on someone's, it looks like it's on someone's like blanket on their bed. And the lighting is really bad. And I'm like, who took this photo and why do they keep using it over and over and over? And the writing is great, but the photo is terrible. And so I think that there's just a value of using your own photos when you promote, anytime you promote your work, having those ready to send them out, having verticals and horizontals, and just being able to send those out. It helps the algorithm recognize those great photos. So the other photos that people take, even if it's with appreciation and they're bad photos that are floating around social media, they will hopefully float to the bottom of the algorithm.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a
It's
great
something that I
point.
hadn't really considered, but yeah, that's
To add to that, and Sam and Nathan now have heard me say this so many times, so I apologize. But I would say the same thing. Oh, and Devron too. I talked about this for like a while last week. So I apologize, but I've come to feel so strongly about having a really good headshot. Just to the story that you mentioned, we're talking about this in the context of work, but I actually just had a situation like a couple days ago where I was working with somebody and they were putting slides together for something we were doing together, and they were putting slides together about me. They didn't ask for a headshot. They actually just went to Bridgeway's website and pulled the headshot from there, which looks like a bank. Like it's like, and they're going to update their own branding, but like I work in an arts and culture program at a nonprofit lender. And so there's like multiple identities, and the headshot that they pulled, it doesn't even look like me. It's like it's so weird. And it's definitely not the headshot that you would use when you're talking to artists. Like, no, like that. And I saw, luckily they sent the slides to me ahead of time. And I caught it and I was like, oh no. Here's the slide, or here's the photo. And it's like a great photo of me, like casually dressed, like there's like kind of looks like a palette kind of behind me. It's like, it just looks really warm and it's nice. My hair is down. Like, it's like, I look like this, and I sent it to them and they're like, oh, wow. Yeah, that's way better. Like, thank you. So people won't always ask, and they're going to use what they find on the internet. So like, and if I didn't have a recent headshot that I'm really happy with, I wouldn't have actually had anything to send them, because I would have relied on my employer, which is like a thing. You don't rely on your employer, or for artists here, or like the selfie or the great shot from you at the beach like last year or something. Really just like have a semi-professional, great looking photo and multiples of them that you can pull out when someone has a great opportunity for you, and ask to see the things before they're published if possible. And I am serious, because a lot of us, especially like newbies, we forget to ask, and say like, oh, before you publish this article, can you let me know what photos you're using? I might have better ones. Like that little bit might save you some real heartache later. So just like a couple last minute tips about that.
Yeah, that's great. Great point.
We were supporting a project that I'm not even sure if it's still in existence, so I'm not going to name it because I have shady feelings about it. But basically, they asked us for all of our like stuff, primarily like a link and a logo, and we sent it to them. And then there was like this big announcement online when they launched their website. And I was like clicking around, where are the sponsors? Where are we listed? And I find it and I'm like, wow, that's not the logo I sent them. They had like found a 5-year-old logo that we weren't using anymore somewhere on the internet. I'm like, why did you ask me for a logo if you were not going to use the one I sent you? And then literally like I contacted them to be like, hey, can you fix this? And it took like over a year. Wow. And I'm like, just give me your WordPress login. I can do it myself. So that's, just being in control of like the stuff that represents you is always beneficial. And getting to preview things is great. Yeah. Because you catch things like them spelling your name horribly wrong, or well, I am really grateful to all of you, our panelists, for joining us tonight, and
Yes, thank you.
our small mighty group here. We have another dog. Another dog has entered the chat.
Aw.
He was begging to get out of my lap. I made him wait for an hour, but he was
Aw.
But yeah, so again, the spot to hit if you're interested in the reduced rate photo sessions, or the info session coming up is porterloves.com/events. And we will see you next time.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. It was fun.
Yes, it was.
Thanks.
It was good to see some old friends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Bye.